Welcome to Chat with the Lawyer. I'm your host, Walla Blagay, and today we have a celebrity in the house, Lynn Lucchi, who is a well-known lobbyist and attorney in Prince George's County. He's with the firm O'Malley Miles, and he's going to talk to us today about his work in Annapolis. He's worked on major legislation such as the minimum wage bill, tobacco tax, and others. Also, he's going to enlighten us on police brutality and legal issues dealing with police shootings, because he also was counsel for the Fraternal Order of Police. So it is an honor to have you, Lynn.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Walla.
All right, well, tell us a little bit about how you became a lobbyist, about your practice, and enlighten us.
Sure. Well, as a college intern, I started working in the Senate of Maryland, and I got hooked. And I never really left.
The bug bit you.
It did. And now I'm the president of the Maryland Government Relations Association, so it's kind of like the union of lobbyists, trying to make sure our profession has a good name and not a bad name.
Right. And so who are your clients as a lobbyist?
It's a diverse group. I mean, I represent some major national corporations like Maximus and Solar City and Parsons Transportation, but also some local governments like Bowie and College Park, and then some coalitions like the Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence and the Maryland Citizens Health Initiative Education Fund. So I enjoy the variety of work, but what I most enjoy are working with coalitions, putting together groups to achieve major legislation, and I've been fortunate to be able to have done that over the years.
So tell us something about some of the major legislation you've worked on.
Well, we were successful in getting the first increase in the state alcohol tax in more than a generation, having those funds be used for public health purposes. Successful in expanding health care in Maryland before it was done nationally, working with coalitions doing that.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. We passed 12 years ago a piece of legislation saying if your employer is of such a size and does not provide health care to its employees, it had to pay into a fund so that the state could do that. And it became known as the Walmart bill, because that was the major employer in the state that didn't provide health care. And it went through litigation, but that really was the beginning of both Walmart trying to become a more responsible employer. It's got a ways to go. Right. And also nationally, Maryland was a leader in terms of the whole idea of the need to expand healthcare and require employers to step up to the plate and make sure their employees are covered. So I mean, that was a great feeling and a great win for Maryland, where different groups came together, civic and labor and religious and charitable, working together to get change done.
Did the bill pass?
And so it passed. It got ultimately reversed by the court, saying that some of those things are only things that a federal government can do. But it was still the catalyst to get things going. And then in 2007, I was working with the coalition to get the state's tobacco tax increased by $1, and for most of those funds to be used to expand Medicaid to the working poor in Maryland. And that was done before the federal Affordable Care Act was done. Maryland was a pioneer in doing that. Been successful in working with coalitions to pass major sensible gun regulations in Maryland.
Can you talk in detail about the gun regulations?
Sure. I started out 20-some years ago with the first ban on assault pistols in Maryland, and then regulations requiring parents to keep their weapons locked up so their children don't have access to it. And then 2 years ago, we worked with the administration, putting together a broad coalition to pass the Firearm Safety Act of 2013.
And that's the big governor's bill.
Right.
You worked on.
Right.
Okay.
And that was just the real satisfying thing. And the major part of that's really not been mentioned much is the requirement for fingerprint licensing, so that before you buy a regulated firearm, they have to check your fingerprints against databases, and they found a lot of folks who they've been looking for, who just by trying to get around the system purchasing a weapon were caught and stopped from doing that.
Now, there was a lot of forums about that bill that caused a lot of discontent with some Maryland voters. Can you talk a little bit about their issues? Like what was going on with that, the fight?
Well, there was a lot of fear spread about what it would do in terms of taking weapons out of people who need a weapon for self-defense. It hasn't proven to be the case at all.
Right.
In fact, murders in the state have gone down much greater than national average.
Right.
With use of firearms. And so it's worked, and the number of purchases of weapons have gone way down as well. I mean, it's really a function of availability, where it gets from being in good hands to being in bad hands, and bad things happening as a result. And so the less availability you have, the better the result.
And so if somebody, the question is, some people do want to be able to get their guns. Now, if they want to get a gun, does this law stop them?
No, you just have to go through the fingerprint check and get the license and go through it. And the state police have made it a very non-cumbersome process.
Okay. And does it, do you know that, was there discussions during debates on the bill on the wait times for the fingerprinting?
There was all sorts of concerns that it would take a while, but now with technology, it's not really a big deal.
Okay.
So it's all worked out well, and it was a very, and Maryland now pretty much has all the types of gun legislation that a state could pass. The problem is it's a small state on major highways, and so until it's passed in surrounding states, we're still not completely safe.
Is there, because I know there's been discussions that in Virginia there is, the laws on guns are much, are broader, and it's easier to get a gun. Can you tell us why?
Virginia's gone in the other direction. They used to have a law saying you could only buy one gun per month. They repealed that. They passed laws to let you bring weapons into churches, recreational centers, the kinds of places where you don't want to have weapons. And so it's just a different culture. And if you look at the major industrialized nations of the world, America stands out with a much higher fatality rate from firearms because it's much greater availability, and it's much more part of our culture, whereas other major industrialized nations, it's not. Right. And so the amount of deaths per capita from firearms is way low, much lower.
Now, is there a limit on how many guns you can buy in Maryland?
There's still the limit of the one gun per month that was passed around the same time as Virginia did. Okay. And of course now you can't buy assault rifles in Maryland. It used to be they would just list certain types. Now if it's one that's like that, if you make a little cosmetic change, it still applies to that. I mean, even though there's not a huge percentage of crimes that are committed by assault rifles, so many of the horrible deaths, especially in schools, were used with assault rifles. And so there's no need to have military-style weapons in terms of self-defense. It's not, or even for hunting. I mean, there's no legitimate purpose for these except for law enforcement.
Right. And are people allowed to bring guns into schools or things?
Well, absolutely not.
There's a limit. Okay, good, and that's good for people to know.
I mean, my son goes to college in Georgia, and the first week in orientation, the president said, "We know you're allowed to bring weapons on campus, but please don't do it." Yeah. And they're like, "Oh my gosh, really?" Yeah. But it's just very different.
So what other major legislation have you worked on?
Well, last year I was very pleased and honored to have been the lobbyist for the Maryland Working Families Coalition, working to raise the minimum wage in Maryland, ultimately to $10.10 phased in over a couple of years. And Maryland workers deserve a raise, and even $10.10 doesn't quite do it, but it doesn't seem why in this day and age in 2015 that someone who works full-time and their spouse works full-time cannot make enough money to provide for their family. And so it needs to be a living wage. But Maryland was a leader in that. Obviously, Congress needs to step up and follow suit. But I was very proud of our state to have stepped forward, and our legislators have stepped forward and supported that legislation.
Now, did you look into research into how the minimum wage impacts poverty in the state of Maryland?
I mean, it definitely raises people up, and it does not. There was alleged that if you raise the minimum wage, you'll have less jobs.
Right.
That's proven not to be the case. In the states that have the higher minimum wage, they have more jobs, empirically. But there are lots of scare tactics. What needs to still be done in Maryland, though, is tipped workers still have a sub-minimum wage, and they work so hard, and they really need to be brought up to everybody else.
So how do you plan to do that as a lobbyist?
Well, there was some hope that by all the 3 Democratic candidates last year pledged to improve the minimum wage law. Our governor-elect has said under his administration that's not going to happen. Right. So we'll have to feel them out and see what happens the first year and how the Democrats and the Republicans work together in Maryland or not, right. To see what happens with that.
And just going into the minimum wage thing, now there was discussion that there were certain legislators, mainly in the county council members, looking to carve out to exempt some businesses from the minimum wage law. Did you know if anything went through with that?
Well, I mean, amusement parks that use seasonal labor, usually younger people, were exempted by the state law, and that was supported by some folks in the county because of Six Flags in the county. Because it's a different type of market, I'm not sure it's a good idea or a bad idea, but it became the reality of what we were dealing with and getting the law passed.
Right, and did you have anything to do now? $10 is for the state, but what about certain counties? What is going on with certain counties?
I mean, Prince George, again, is a leader, and Montgomery and the District of Columbia worked together collaboratively to have a higher minimum wage than the state, which is good because the Washington, D.C. is a market, and so I don't think it's really hurt employment in Prince George County or Montgomery County one bit. There's still a very vibrant economy and still has some of the lowest unemployment rates in the state. But I mean, the state allowed counties to have an even higher wage, although there was some talk about preempting that, but that failed. So we should be proud of being Prince George's County, where we recognize the value of work.
Yeah. And just to get, I've heard national Democratic leaders argue that the minimum wage should be up to $20. Do you think we could ever get to that?
Well, I mean, you can't make a change that drastic overnight, but I mean, what we really need to do is to index the minimum wage, so as the cost of living goes up, it goes up instead of having to go back so every several years and beg for the increase. And it just needs to be calibrated to
the inflation rate?
To inflation. And that was one of the disappointments that did not happen in the last General Assembly session, or actually 2 years ago. No, last year, but that should have happened. That was part of the governor's legislation.
Right. Well, to everyone's surprise, we now have, not everyone, but some people, we have a Republican governor. And how does that change things for you, seeing as though you probably worked closely with some of the Democratic leaders to pass many of the bills that you've worked closely with? Well,
ironically, the last time we had a Republican governor, the presiding officers of the House and the Senate actually became more progressive because they were wanting to take control of the agenda. And even though now there's a record number of Republicans in the House of Delegates, it's still veto-proof majorities of the Democratic Party in the House and the Senate. And the Democratic caucuses, because in the elections the moderate or marginal Democrats lost, the Democratic caucuses are now more liberal than they were before. So on one hand, I'm not sure that it's going to make a huge amount of difference. Taxes can't be rolled back unless the legislature agrees. On the other hand, Maryland has a very strong budget system for the governor, where the governor can, only the governor can increase items or move from one category to another. All the legislature can do is decrease categories of the budget. And so,
can you go into that? Because many people don't understand that the governor has so much power versus other states. So what can the governor do exactly with the budget that in other states doesn't happen?
Well, so on January 21st, Governor-elect Hogan will be sworn in as the governor of Maryland. January 23rd, he has to present a budget. And the General Assembly can only make cuts from that budget. They cannot increase items. And they can't even say, well, this item is, well, we want to cut this item, we want to put it over here. They can't move things in the budget that increases an area. And it's, the governor has the strongest budget powers of any governor in the country in terms of the budget. And I think folks don't realize that. Now what's happened in the past is they find out something, a pet program of the governor, and they'll hold it hostage and say, restore some of those cuts or your program is going to get it. But in this case, Governor Hogan made no promises of new programs or new spending, so it's going to be kind of hard to find that budgetary hostage.
Interesting. Well, I mean, Governor Hogan has a lot to cut. Seems like this is the time that it's time to start to cut the budget. Do you have any insight on what possibly programs in Prince George's County we could be looking at?
Well, I mean, some of the things that are feared, one is there's a part of the education budget that's not mandatory called the Geographic Cost of Education Index that provides extra funding to jurisdictions like Prince George's where the cost of living is higher. Our county schools realize like $35 million of that. He could cut that out immediately without changing the law, and just cut that out.
So then what happens? How would the schools would have to function with?
They'd have to make major cuts to make up for that.
Including possibly school closures?
That or increasing class size or reducing some of the specialty programs. I mean, it's, they've had to cut a lot in the past, and so there's, not a lot of areas to do it besides, things like that. And in the governor's capital budget, there was an agreement to have, from the current governor, to have $40 million in there as the state's contribution to build a new regional hospital in Largo. He could cut that out and kill the deal for the hospital. We hope he doesn't, but it's certainly a big attractive target when you're trying to cut back the capital budget. And then we've all heard about cutting out, and he's talked about it, cutting out the money for the Purple Line,
which is federally funded.
So that we would leave a lot of federal money at the table, which is a reason not to do that. But he said he wants to move from mass transit that not too many people use to more roads, which people do use. Now, of course, a lot of people don't use mass transit because there isn't much, and because it only connects to Washington, D.C. and not from one Prince George's employment center or residential center to another like the Purple Line would do. And so if you have it, they will come. But that's an impossible target as well.
Well, we're going to come right back. We're going to take a short break. I'm here interviewing Lynn Lucchi with O'Malley Miles, and we're going to talk about police shootings. He was also a representative for the Fraternal Order of Police. So tell us about that experience.
Sure. When I first started practicing law for about a dozen years, I had the honor of representing men and women in the police department all over the state. And I represented over 100 of them who were involved in department-related shootings, discharges of weapons. And it's something that's a very traumatic thing for a police officer. Most police officers go through a 20 or 25-year career without ever being forced to have to discharge their firearm. And so when they do, they're taught to do it to protect their life or the life of another person, because it's deadly force, and so you have to have a threat of death in order to do that. And there were some headline-making incidents in Prince County 20, 25 years ago that I was involved with. But Prince George's County is really at the forefront of having things, getting it right in terms of preventing things that have happened in other areas of this country by doing things right. And the most important part, I mean, there's different procedures you can have in place, but the most important part is to really build and maintain trust between the community and the police department. And this county does a very good job of that. The municipal police departments in this county, which there are a lot of them, do a very good job of that. And it's really a proactive, affirmative effort you have to do to be out in the community and to be seen and to do things for the community that our police department and the county level and the cities do. Beyond that, Prince George's County was a pioneer in proper training for police officers. It's called judgmental training of when to shoot and when not to shoot. And there is a person from this county who invented this type of training that's used with a video and a computer that's been now replicated all over this country called Shoot, Don't Shoot, where you go into a room and you have videos of different threats and non-threats, and you have this weapon that's tied into the computer, and then you fire and they tell you whether or not it was a threat, or whether there wasn't, or whether you survived, or whether you were killed, and reaction times. And it's a fascinating tool, but it's a very good one. And in this county, every time a police officer discharges his firearm, he has to go back through that training again, and he has to go back to the range and requalify. There's a whole protocol. In addition, for 25 years, Prince George's County has had a civilian review board that looks at the investigations from internal affairs, makes its own independent decision, and will often kick it back to the police department to investigate this or interview that witness or look at that. And so that happens as well. That's not in the practice for many parts of this country, but it is in Prince George's County.
Now let's go into the civilian review board, because I've been to a few panels around the state of Maryland, and there's just been a discussion of how internal affairs, basically, it is friends reviewing friends. All the police are part of the fraternal order. Police, like, they're all working together and they're reviewing each other. It's harder for them to actually discipline someone within their own group because of the fact that they are friends, reviewing friends. So there's the idea that maybe we should move the review of police officers out of internal affairs, meaning there should be no internal affairs. Let's just take it all to an independent review board, which may include some retired law enforcement and other people from the community and others. I mean, what do you think about something like that?
Well, two things. One is, it's not been my experience. When a brand new police officer walks in and has a lieutenant interrogating him for several hours, he does not feel like that lieutenant is his friend. And the lieutenant, and usually the investigators are very experienced officers, and usually the people who shoot are relatively new officers. And there is not a feeling of comfort that it's all being done. And police departments, including this one, discipline plenty of officers for violating their departmental rules or for violating laws. The second thing is the chief of police is still the one who's responsible to the county executive, or in cities to the mayor and city council. And so he really needs to have the final say in terms of discipline. And so while it's good to have civilian review of what's done, it still needs to be done within the department, because the chief is still the chief and he's still responsible. And if something happens, he's the one who's going to get called on the carpet with the county executive. So he's got to be that he has everything under control in his shop. But it's not to mean that it shouldn't be an open and transparent process and have outside scrutiny of it, because I think that keeps everybody on their toes. And I think that's worked in Prince George's County now for 25 years. The other thing in Prince George's County that was one of the first jurisdictions in the state, which I think is another good thing, is that every police shooting automatically, where it strikes someone, if you shoot at someone and you miss, it's not automatic, but where you strike someone, it goes to the grand jury for its review.
That hasn't worked with other places.
Well, there it was unique. Here it's become institutionalized, and I've represented plenty of officers who were invited to appear before the grand jury, but to do that, they have to waive their constitutional right against self-incrimination, and they have to walk in there without the assistance of an attorney. And you have, in Prince George's County, in Maryland, 23 people firing questions at you. So it's a very intimidating thing, and not something that you would do lightly. It's not a right that the right against self-incrimination is not a right that you would waive lightly, and the right to be accompanied by counsel is not the one that you would waive lightly. So it is a very difficult thing for an officer, and he could opt not to appear and not waive his right. But that way you have a group of citizens, again, having an independent review of what happened and making its own decision on whether it's probable cause that a crime occurred.
The reason why police brutality and police shooting is very important today is because of what occurred in Ferguson, and not to mention some of the other events in Cleveland, and we've got these popping up everywhere now.
Except here.
Except here. Well, there are police shootings in Prince George's County.
Right, but you don't have the
Right.
outrage and the reactions here.
Exactly. Now, what if let's just say the Michael Brown occurred in Prince George's County? What would have been different? Could you maybe give us some insight of what could have happened that probably went wrong there that wouldn't have gone on in Prince George's County?
Well, one thing is you would have had already a bond of trust between the community and the police department, so there would be a dialogue about it, as opposed to in Ferguson where the mayor said, we don't have a racial problem, there's no problem here at all, and he said that weeks afterwards. The other thing is if there were peaceful protests, you would not bring out the cavalry with assault weapons and tanks. I mean, our folks know better than that, and that just made things worse.
Well, there is some thought that in the Prince George's County Police Department they use a lot of, they use almost like SWAT teams for a lot of things. So you do know they don't have the same equipment that they have in Ferguson.
They do when they need it, but they wouldn't use it for peaceful protests of citizens. They use it for serving warrants against dangerous felons when their lives are at stake.
Right.
I mean, I've represented many officers who are no longer with us because they were shot by a member of the criminal element, and I worked with their families, and I've been to their funerals, and so it's a very dangerous profession, and I admire them. I would not have the courage that they have to go out every day and be subject to those types of job hazards. Right. Which is why Prince George's County is one of the first jurisdictions in the country to have 20-year retirement, saying after 20 years you maybe might want to look at another profession because it's a very stressful one.
We're shortly running out of time, but I wanted to go quickly. The Police Bill of Rights, do you think that is something that protects police officers in police shootings, or?
Well, it sets up a due process procedure that Maryland, again, was one of the first states in the country to have that. I mean, it's always a balance, and I think there's a lot of things in the law enforcement officers' Bill of Rights that strikes that balance. But a police officer is subjecting himself not just to a career-ending decision by the department, but opening himself up to very severe criminal charges if he's not afforded due process. And so, I mean, it's worked well in the state, but there's always things that people look at about it. But I mean, it's worked well.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on our show.
Glad to be here.
Now, if someone wants to contact you to discuss the legislation or even have you maybe lobby for them, how do they get in contact with you?
Go to our website, omng.com.
All right, all right. Well, thank you, Len, for coming on the show. And stay tuned with our next show. You can contact us if you have any questions at chatwiththelawyer@gmail.com or check our website at www.wallabrigade.com. Thank you.